Once again, we're going to try to keep up with what's going to be a busy week. Now, there's a trade that may very well come to pass later today where Devan Dubnyk joins the Sharks as well. And the rumor coming out of an Athletic reporter who is connected to the Wild is that the Wild would get back a 2022 fifth-round pick. Now, for people who would look at that and say, that's a really lopsided deal, I would say no. It would require cap space for Minnesota. Dubnyk had a miserable season. Kakkonen likely has earned a top two role for next year. He was arguably their best goaltender. I know it's a very small sample size, but Kakkonen, at the very least, has earned the right to compete for a backup spot, and Bill Guerin was very clear that he wanted to upgrade the goaltending position. So Dubnyk, who was a backup to Stalock this past season anyways, is likely on his way to San Jose. Again, this hasn't been confirmed, so I'm not going to put it in the title because it hasn't been confirmed. But it would appear that the Minnesota Wild are ready to make this salary move. And the idea that, well, isn't Dubnyk worth more than a fifth? No. At this stage, no. San Jose, if they're going to take that whole contract, no. You're likely not going to get much more than that for him. Again, he's over 30, and he just put up statistically one of his worst seasons. Dubnyk is not going to have a lot of value on the trade market right now. So we'll see if that one comes through, and I'm not going to do another video at like 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock rock, or anything like that, because, again, it's on the board now. So if it comes to pass, great. If it doesn't, we'll see what happens. But it looks like Dubnyk's done playing in Minnesota. And they made it official. Carson Soucy is re-signed. 3 years, $8.25 million in total, so $2.75 million a year. It's a decent contract, pretty good cap hit. And so Soucy won't be going anywhere. If they'd played him in more games this year, he would have been a restricted free agent, but he didn't meet that threshold, so he would have been an unrestricted free agent. Now it doesn't matter. He's staying in Minnesota. Devon Shore was not given a qualifying offer by Columbus. I'm pretty sure I talked about that in the Columbus off-season video where I was talking about 2020, 2021, where just the amount of money to qualify Shore, I didn't think they were going to do it. I figured he would be an unrestricted free agent. And we'll see whether or not Shore gets a contract from somebody. I would think league minimum for Shore, maybe a little bit above. But it's going to be an interesting day on Friday. Friday's going to have a lot of stuff going on. Don Sweeney again has come out publicly and said he supports Tuukka Rask. Good, so do I. This idea that's come out of Rask leaving the bubble and all of that, as if Boston was going to win the Stanley Cup with Rask, they were not going to knock out Tampa. So you could get a time machine and bring Jerry Cheevers out of the 70s. And it wouldn't work. The Boston Bruins weren't winning the Stanley Cup, and Tuukka Rask has been pretty good. I don't know. He's been a pretty decent goaltender. So I don't see any reason why Boston would want to trade him. He's got 1 year left in his contract, and so I believe Sweeney on this, that Rask is not on the block. Krug is on his way out of town. I was thinking about doing a video on Torrey Krug today, but I'm leaning towards doing videos on the free agents when they've signed elsewhere, and doing videos on which contracts might end up being problematic and which ones are probably pretty good. But Boston, I don't see any reason to move Rask. I really don't. It's not like they have a Shesterkin type goaltender knocking the door down and waiting to get his shot in the NHL. So as long as Boston doesn't have that fantastic young goaltender knocking on the door right now, and I know Swayman may become that guy, but he's not that guy yet, so I don't see any reason to move Rask. According to Jim Benning, they're trying to add a second-round pick. I don't know how you're going to do that. I would think that might be... you know what? It's speculative season, so let's go ahead and do this. Let's speculate that Jake Virtanen is going to go for a second-round pick. Speculate away. Because he's one of the only ones I can see of the Canucks that's young that they'd actually want to move on from. They're not going to get that for the rights to Stetcher. They're not going to qualify Stetcher either, although he didn't say who they are not going to qualify. Didn't talk about buyouts it said they're basically undecided when it comes to buyouts. They're probably trying to figure out a way to buy out Louis Eriksson, and they keep doing the math and going, but how does that? No, that can't be all it saves us. So, and apparently Levo's close to being cleared. Josh Levo, though, he's unrestricted. So if Josh Levo, if they're going to keep him, they better sign him to a contract over the next 4 days. They're going to go, oh, right, we don't have the rights to him anymore. Josh Levo, I was very grateful to Toronto for handing him over when they did. I think it was best for Toronto, for Levo, and for the Canucks. I thought that was a class move by the Maple Leafs as well, that they made sure that he got a chance to play, in that if he wasn't able to crack the Toronto lineup, that they were willing to trade him, and they did. And so for Vancouver, useful player, hasn't played in a very long time. I was at his last game, and that was just a brutal hit that he took, and I would love to see Levo back in a Canucks jersey next year. I didn't plan on it. I don't know that it necessarily happens, but I'd love to see him come back. So we'll see whether or not they do actually commit to any sort of a buyout on any of their players. Again, Eriksson would be the obvious one, but they actually lose money by buying out Eriksson. Doesn't make any sense. It's a horrible contract. And now Benning's trying to dig his way out of that. So we'll see what happens there. Big news coming out of Philadelphia. Matt Niskanen leaning towards retirement. It's only at this point of the board, because as I'm putting the board together, that announcement came out. And by announcement, I mean it's likely he's going to retire. He's basically told the Flyers, yeah, I'm not coming back. I'm just going to retire. And I would not be surprised if there are other players that make the same decision. I talked about this during the shutdown, during the pause, coming back from the pause, that some of these veteran players will spend a lot of time with their family. They'll have a lot of time to reflect. Probably look at their bank account and say, you know what, we are good. I want to be home. I want to be with my family, and they may make the decision not to come back. There will also be those veterans who were saying, you know what, I'm going to retire, who after the pause and then maybe a short comeback say, well, maybe I can come back for one more year. I mean, I'm not saying Justin Williams is going to do it, but I didn't bring up his name for no reason. So yeah, $5.75 million is owed to Niskanen for next year, and that would free up that cap space. He retires because he's under the age of 35. That cap money then gets freed up, and Philadelphia can look elsewhere to make a move on the blue line, which sounds great, except Matt Niskanen was awesome for Philadelphia on the blue line this year. He was exactly what they needed on that blue line, and losing Niskanen, it would cause, you know, some destabilization of that defense. And then I'm not sure that you do look to move Ghost at that point, or do you still look to move Ghost, and then you're trying to bring in another defenseman at the same time. Justin Braun has re-signed. That also happened while I was putting the board together. 2 years, $3.6 million for Justin Braun. He'll be staying in Philadelphia and maybe getting a bigger role if Niskanen's not going to be there. Maybe that's what happens. With Philadelphia, the one benefit is they seem to be pretty deep on the blue line. But again, Niskanen did provide that stabilizing force, Stanley Cup, on his resume and all that. And we'll see what happens with the Flyers from here. Now, word is out that the Chicago Blackhawks have been working on bringing in Matt Murray. The idea was the Penguins gave them the rights to talk to Matt Murray, and they weren't able to work out a sign and trade. So basically, the Hawks weren't able to work out an exact dollar figure that Murray would sign for. Basically sign the contract and then make a trade with the Penguins. But it looks like that's percolating, that the Penguins are allowing teams to talk to Matt Murray, allowing teams to work out some kind of a deal with Murray, and then work out a trade from there. So the Chicago Blackhawks, that tells me that, yep, they've moved on from Corey Crawford, which we kind of knew anyways. But if you're looking at bringing in Matt Murray, he clearly would be the starter. And if Corey Crawford's turning down, and the rumor was he was turning down $3.5 million. Well, you're not going to pay over $3.5 million for your backup because you're not Jim Nill. So that's an old remark. Strike that remark from the record. But anyways, yeah, Matt Murray. It still could happen. They can still circle back, but it's going to be very interesting because, of course, the restricted free agent market opens on the 1st, and we'll be looking at what happens with Barzal, and we'll be looking at what happens with Matt Murray. Maybe a team throws an offer sheet, and Murray signs it, and then Pittsburgh has to make a decision because it's a team they don't necessarily want to make a trade with. So things could get very interesting. And last but not least on the board, Ken Holland. As I said, he's had trade talks with about 25 other GMs. There's a lot going on behind the scenes. So as much as we discuss what may or may not happen, there's a lot more going on behind the scenes than we know about. And this is why when we get into all the rumors of who may or may not go, like Dubnyk here at the top of the board and his likelihood of going to the Sharks, there's all kinds of others that we don't think of. So, as a for instance, Donato was one that we saw coming, but there have been other trades that we don't necessarily see coming. Olimata being one that just seemed to kind of come out of nowhere. So yeah, there's a lot of talks going on between general managers, and he did say when asked he didn't think that they would draft a defenseman at 14. I'm not entirely surprised, and here's why. If you draft a defenseman at 14, they're not going to be ready for this coming season anyways. And the Oilers already have some good young defensemen coming up. So the idea is we already have some good young defense coming up, and we'll draft the best player available, who may very well be a winger. Maybe Jarvis is available there. Maybe they like Greg. I don't know. This draft is really up in the air. It's really wide open, and I'm anxious to see tomorrow what's going to happen. So let me know your thoughts regarding any of these items on the board. Do not be surprised when there is more news later on when I'm doing another news video. And yes, for people who are going to ask, I will be doing a Niskanen video on his career because apparently his career's come to an end. And I think it's an interesting one because he's one of those defensemen that has at times flown under the radar, has at times been overpaid in his career. But when we look at his body of work at the end, pretty solid all-around career. It's a shame he didn't reach 1,000 games if this is truly where it ends. But I always respect when a player goes out on his own terms. When a player retires without being told he has to retire. So, when a guy goes to unrestricted free agency and nobody signs him, and then a year down the road he says, well, I guess I retire. And you're like, well, wait, why didn't you retire a year ago or 2 years ago? Or it's one of those things where I do have a lot of respect for a player who would be in great demand, like Niskanen, a player who is still wanted by the team he plays for in Philadelphia and says, I'm going to hang him up. So we'll see if there are other players that have that same tactic going forward. But let me know what you guys think. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I'll talk to you again soon.